Chapter 20, Declaring Independence. Unless you like to memorize dates, there aren't many that you will need to remember, but here are a few that are important. 1215, 1492, 1607, 1620. What happened in those years? You can't remember? Go ahead and try. You might be surprised and find out there is more in your brain than you realize. Then, if you need to check, look on page 100. Now, I have another date for you to remember, and this is one that is most important of all. Something happened on that day that changed America. It even changed the world. It was the day that King George didn't think was important. He would find out how wrong he was. The date is July 4th, 1776. It was the day the members of the Second Continental Congress approved a Declaration of Independence. It was a year after the Battle of Bunker Hill, and finally the Americans had made up their minds to be free of Great Britain. But that wasn't why the world had changed. It was the words that they had used in the Declaration that made all the difference. The delegates believed that if they were going to vote for independence, they should have a good reason. They knew that when they signed the Declaration, they became traitors to England. They would each be hanged if England captured them. If they were going to take that big risk, they wanted to make it worthwhile, and it would be worthwhile if they would help create a free nation, a great nation, a nation run by its citizens, something that had never been done before. So they thought it important to explain exactly what they were doing and why it was necessary to be free of English rule. That's why they asked Thomas Jefferson, one of the members of Congress, to write a paper called A Declaration that would tell their beliefs about good government, tell what King George had done wrong, and announce that the colonies were now free and independent states. Some people thought it surprising that Thomas Jefferson was asked to write the Declaration. Jefferson was one of the youngest members of the Continental Congress. He was a tall, shy redhead who loved to read, write, run, ride horseback, and play the violin. He had a reputation for writing well. John Adams said of him, though a silent member in Congress, he was so prompt, frank, and decisive upon committees and in conversations that not even Samuel Adams was more so, that soon he seized upon my heart. Jefferson had left his wife behind on his Virginia farm, and he missed her. He wasn't sure if he could write a good declaration, but John Adams and Benjamin Franklin had faith in him. They talked Thomas Jefferson into trying. Adams told him, "You can write 10 times better than I can." Adams and Franklin were right. Thomas Jefferson knew just what to say, and he said it in a way that inspired people all over the world. The whole Declaration is something to read and to think about, but one part will ring in your ears with its greatness. Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." That was plain language in the 18th century, but you might have to read it a couple times just to understand it. It is worth doing. Those words are worth memorizing. All men are created equal. Just what does equal mean? Are we all the same? To look around you, of course we aren't. Some of us are smarter than us. Some of us are better athletes, and some of us are better looking, and some are nicer. But none of that matters, says Jefferson. We are equal in the eyes of God, and we are entitled to equal rights. The right to live, the right to be free, the right to be able to try to find the kind of life that will make us happy. And that is the whole reason for having governments, he said. Governments are not made to make kings happy. They are for the benefit of the people who are being governed. Governments should have the consent of the governed. Sometimes when ideas are written down, they take on meanings that go beyond what the writers intended. Jefferson's Declaration of Independence was great from the moment he wrote it, but it has grown even greater with the passing of time. He said, all men are created equal. He didn't mention women. Didn't he mean to include women? No one knows, perhaps not. We know that in the 18th century, the words men and mankind included men and women. But very few people except Thomas Paine thought much about women's rights. It was the 20th century before women in America had the right to vote. Did Thomas Jefferson mean to include black men when he said all men? Historians sometimes argue about that. You'll have to decide for yourself. In 1776, when Jefferson wrote the Declaration, he included a long section in which he described slavery as a cruel war against human nature. Yet Jefferson lived in a slave society and owned slaves himself. He thought slavery was wrong, and he said so. Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than those people are to be free, wrote Jefferson. Many congressmen agreed. John Adams spoke out strongly against slavery. Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush founded the first anti-slavery society in the New World. But South Carolina and Georgia would not sign the Declaration if it contained the anti-slavery section. So Jefferson's anti-slavery words were taken out, and the delegates compromised. Should they have gone ahead without those southern colonies? That would have meant that the Deep South would not have joined in the fight against England. It might have meant defeat for the proposed Union of States. Jefferson and Adams and Franklin and others thought the Union was more important than the issue of slavery. They knew that staying with England would not bring freedom to the slaves. They thought slavery could be dealt with later. Do you agree with them? Those were tough decisions the delegates were making. It took a civil war to end slavery. Do you think that that war could have been avoided? Do you think that the delegates should have acted differently in 1776? Of one thing you can be sure. Today, when people all over the world read Jefferson's words, they understand them to mean all people, men, women, children of all colors and beliefs.